In this video, I'll be solving quadratic equations by completing the square. When we work with these type of equations, they're written in standard form. Remember, standard form is y equals ax squared plus bx plus c. Here's our first example. When we complete the square, the first thing we'll do is move our constant term to the other side of the equation. So our constant term here is negative 38. That's our c. So we're going to move it by adding it to both sides of the equation. So we end up with x squared plus 14x equal 38. Alright, so we're completing the square. Because we moved that c value, we have to come up with a new one. So this is how we do it. We're going to take half of b, our middle term here, we're going to take half of that number. So 14 divided by 2. Then we're going to square it. So 14 divided by 2 is 7. 7 squared is 49. This number here goes on both sides of the equation. So it's being added to both sides of the equation. So our new equation is x squared plus 14x plus 49 equals 87. Okay, now we're going to change this side into looking similar to vertex form. You can factor it if you like, but really all we're going to do is write this as a binomial squared. Okay? And the way we come up with that is we know we're going to have an x because we need that when we write in vertex form. But the number that goes in here with x, we get it from here. That number is always the same sign and half of b. Alright? So it's the same sign as the b value and it's half of the b value. And it equals to 87. Okay. So now we're almost done. We got to get x all by itself. So our next step is to take the square root of both sides. Remember, square roots cancel out squares. What I do to one side, I must do to the other. So we have x plus 7 equals plus or minus the square root of 87. Always remember to check and see if you can simplify the square root. If not, we continue with the process. We're still getting x all by itself, so we're going to subtract 7 on both sides. So x equals negative 7 plus or minus the square root of 87. Remember, this is two solutions, so this really means negative 7 plus the square root of 87. X can equal that, or x can equal negative 7 minus the square root of 87. It can be those two solutions. Okay, here's our next example. Remember, we're completing the square, so our first step is to move the constant term to the other side. So our constant here is 11, so we're going to subtract 11. So we have x squared minus 12x equals negative 11. Alright, so remember, next step is to find the new c value. We're going to do that by taking half of b, half of the term b, and squaring it. So negative 12 divided by 2 squared. So negative 12 divided by 2 is negative 6. Negative 6 squared is 36. So we're going to add 36 in on both sides. So now let's write it out. X squared minus 12x plus 36 equals 25. Our next step is to write this as a binomial squared. So remember, you're going to have your parentheses with your square. We have an x. Remember, you take the sign of b is negative, and half of b is 6. And it equals 25. So now we square root both sides. Square roots and squares cancel. So that's x minus 6 equals plus or minus the square root of 25. We check and see if we can simplify that square root. 25, when you take the square root of it, you should get a 5. So we end up with x minus 6 equals plus or minus 5. Add 6 to both sides. So our final answer is x equals 6 plus or minus 5. And remember, this means 6 plus 5. So we're saying one x value is 11. And 6 minus 5, so one x value is positive 1. Let's do another one. All right. So this time we have a number already on the other side of the equal sign. That's fine. As long as it's a constant term, we can keep going with the problem. So our first step is to move this c value over. So that's positive 91 plus 91. So we have x squared minus 4x equals 100. Okay. So now we're going to do what we normally do. Half the middle term and square it. So negative 4 divided by 2 is negative 2 squared is going to be a positive 4. So we add in a 4 on both sides. So we have x squared minus 4x plus 4 equals 104. Write your problem with your variable as a binomial squared. So parentheses with the square. We have an x. We take the sign of b. And we do half of b, which is 2. And then we write out 104. We square root both sides. So that's x minus 2 equals plus or minus the square root of 104. Remember, see if you can simplify the square root. The square root of 104 simplifies to 2 square root of 26. Next, we're going to add 2 to both sides. So x equals 2 plus or minus 2 square root 26. So this means our answer can be 2 plus the square root of 26, 2 square root 26. Or it can be 2 minus 2 square root 26. Okay, so all of these, the a value have been 1. Let's do some more with a value equal to 1. So our next equation, look, we have a x squared, so the x squared term is on one side, but the b is over here and the c is over here. So we're just going to move our b value back over to the other side by subtracting it. So we have x squared minus 18x equal 40. We're going to take half the middle number and square it, so negative 18 divided by 2 is negative 9 squared equals 81. So plus 81 on both sides. So that's x squared minus 18x plus 81 equal 121. All right. Remember, we're going to write it as a binomial squared. So we have an x, the sign of b, half of b, equals 121. We're going to take the square root of both sides. So x minus 9 equals plus or minus 11. Add 9, add 9, x equals 9 plus or minus 11, which means x can be 9 plus 11, which equals 20, or x can be 9 minus 11, which equals negative 2. Both of these are solutions. All right, now we have somewhere the a value is greater, different from 1. All right, so our first step is always the same. Move your constant term to the other side of the equation. So I have 9x squared plus 18x equals 79. All right, our next step, because this a value is different from 1, I need to factor out this a value. So I'm going to have 9 parentheses x squared plus 9x. Okay? So we got x squared plus 9x. I'm sorry, x squared plus, not 9x. I'm subtracting, sorry. That's supposed to be a 2. That's supposed to be a 2. All right? So when you factor it out, we have x squared plus 2x, and I'm going to close those parentheses over here, equals that 79. All right. Now, we still are going to do the same process, find a new c. So I take half of b, so 2 divided by 2 squared, that's 1. Okay? So plus 1. So now, be careful. When you're adding in the 1 to the other side, it's not just the 1, it's 9. You have parentheses, then 1. So we're going to do 9 parentheses 1. All right. So whatever you multiply or factor out, you multiply it with the number on the other side. So this is really 9x squared plus 2x plus 1 equals 88. All right. So our next step, do what we normally do. Write it as a binomial squared. Okay. So I have x, take the sign of b, half of b. We're going to continue to solve the equation. We want to get x all by itself, but look, we have a number out front. So before we can take the square root, we have to divide by 9 on both sides. So I have x plus 1 squared equals 88 over 9. Now we can take the square root. So we have x plus 1 equals plus or minus the square root of 88 over 9. And if you want to split the 88 over 9 to this, the square root of 88 over the square root of 9, that's fine. Okay. So that means we're going to end up with, and I'm just going to use this little space over here because I wrote a little too big, x plus 1 equals plus or minus the square root of 88 is 2 square root 22. 22. I know it's a little messy. Make it a little bit smaller. 2 square root of 22 over the square root of 9, which is 3. Okay. Subtract 1, subtract 1. So it's x equals negative 1 plus or minus 2 square root 22 over 3.